Hey, I'm Prirak, one of the facilitators for the course, and today we're going to go over basic micropipettes which you'd find in any MCB lab. So here in front of me I have 5 main micropipettes, and what you'll see is they all have very odd numbers on them, and I'll go over what they mean in a short bit. But basically these micropipettes are called micropipettes because they work on the micro scale, which is 10 to the negative 6th of a meter. So whenever you talk about micropipettes, keep that in mind. You are working with a very, very small amount. So if we start with the first one here, you'll see that it actually says 1000 on it. And this often differs by labs, but almost every single one of them will have some sort of 1000, indicating that this is actually 1000 microliters, which is the maximum volume. The number you see on the top of each pipette like this always indicates the maximum volume it tends to hold, and in this case you have 1000 microliters. If you're in a lab that has very fancy pipettes, oftentimes it actually tells you the range. More often than not, you often have to just know. And usually the biggest pipettes will hold between 100 and 1000 microliters. So this one is actually the one that's the biggest, and it holds anywhere between 100 and 1000 microliters. A very common thing you'll see in lab is sometimes you'll be asked to use like a 1 milliliter sample, and a 1 milliliter sample is usually 1000 microliters. And so you always have to use the biggest pipettes for those. And these come with their own tips, and I'll go into tips a bit later. But for now, this is the biggest pipette. It's called a P1000, which most people refer to it as. But in this case, it's just the biggest quantity you tend to use. Next up, you have the P200, which is also another common micropipette found in the lab. This dispenses anywhere between 20 to 200 microliters. So that's anywhere between 0.02 to 0.2 of a milliliter, which is also a very, very small amount. But believe it or not, you do actually make quite a bit of use of this. And these also have separate tips. These have smaller tips, as you can see. This is the P200. The top is very, very, it has a smaller diameter than the P1000, which is clearly very thick. Now we're going to move on to the P20, which is the last common micropipette. P20 dispenses anywhere between 2 microliters to 20 microliters. And this is often on the lower scale of the volumes you tend to use, but it's still nonetheless important. And depending on the types of tips you have, these could work with the same tips that you would use for P200, but not always. And now if you're like very fancy and you're working on an even smaller scale, that's very, very small, then you can have these two last additional ones. This one is the P10, and this dispenses anywhere in between 0.5 to 10 microliters. It actually says on the top here. 0.5 microliters, again, a very small amount. And this is especially if you, let's say you have very little plasmid left, or you need only like 1 microliter or something, this is the sort of pipette you want to use. And let's say you don't even want 1 microliter. If you want something even less than a simple microliter, you would use this last pipette, which we have. It's called the P2, and this dispenses anywhere between 0.1 to 2 microliters, which is very, very, very small. And usually the error range on each pipette is about 10%. So like the P1000, the error range on that is significantly larger than the error range on like a P2, which makes sense intuitively. But the point is, if you're dispensing a certain amount, you want to always use a pipette that minimizes that sort of error. And so now that we've gone over the general pipette types, I'm going to shortly give you a brief introduction to the types of tips. So any sort of lab will usually have 3 main types of tips. Here you have the big tips, the medium tips, and the super small tips. The big tips are obviously the ones that will be used with the P1000, and those work because they fit perfectly. And often you can see that this can hold a much larger volume than you'd expect from like a P200. So that's for P1000. And that's the only tips you would use with the P1000. Next, for the P200 and the P20, both of these two use the same tips. They use this medium-sized tip. And so if you put it on, you'll see that it actually works really well. And it holds and it fits, and you just dispense it. Similarly, if you have a P20, it also still fits the same tips as a P200. And then lastly, you have these last two guys, which I told you were the super small pipettes. And these dispense really small amounts, so fittingly, they actually have pipette tips that are super, super thin, that can hold even smaller volumes that you wouldn't expect a P1000 to hold. And so these are just this is just a brief overview describing the 5 main types of pipettes I have on my bench. Most of you who are going to take Bio 1A or Bio 1AL will often not even use the smaller tube. The Bio 1A, Bio 1AL curriculum only covers like P20, P200, P1000. But for the most part, these are the sorts of pipettes you'll be using and working with. And next up, you'll be seeing Liv give a short demonstration on how they were used and how you dispense them.
Hi everyone, my name is Liv, one of the other facilitators for this course, and now that Prerak showed you all the conceptual things about pipetting, I'm going to show you how to actually use one. So here we're going to start with the P1000. As you can see up here, it's the largest pipette. And what you see on this side is on this window is basically the numbers that tell you the volume for how much you're actually pipetting. So on this one it says 100, which we know means 1,000 microliters, which is equal to 1 milliliter. If I take this knob and then turn it, it'll go down from there. So if we look at this right now, we're doing 910 microliters. Continuing down, you can change it all the way down to 100. To actually use a pipette, you hold it in your hand like this, pretty much, and then you find the appropriate tips. So I know that these tips go with the P1000. Open the box, firmly press down to get the tip on there. Make sure you actually do press it down firmly, because if you don't, sometimes it can fall off and then spill reagents everywhere. Then you look here, set the volume of what you need. So let's say that I'm going to be pipetting 900 microliters. So I'll set it like this. Take your reagent or whatever liquid, open it, put it in, and I did that incorrectly. Okay. There you go, you pulled it up. So there are 2 points of resistance on a pipette. So as you can kind of see, if I push it down like this, it seems like it's down to the end, but if I push it down more, I actually can. So this first point of resistance is where you go down to suck up the volume. So you take it, push it down to the first point of resistance, open up your reagent, stick it in, and pull out the correct volume. And then once you release the volume, you're going to push it down and then push it past that to the second point of resistance. And the second point is kind of like an eject button. It essentially just pushes the rest out to make sure you got the correct volume. And there you have it. So I pipetted 1 milliliter into this tube right here. And then to get rid of your tip that you used, you press down on this button that's on the other side. You push and it'll eject the tip by moving this metal part down and pushing it. So very similar process with all of the other tips or all the other pipettes, although the numbers on the window are going to be different. So if we go over here, the next one is the the P200 here, as you can see, and you read this one a little bit differently. So if we set it all the way, this is going to take a while. Okay. So this one's easy because it actually, you can see the numbers. So it says 100. So right now this is 100 microliters. So it's pretty easy like that. Find the appropriate tips, press down firmly, open my reagent, press to the first point of resistance, not all the way down because then you'll get the incorrect volume. Stick it in, release slowly, and there you have it. That's 1,000. Or no, sorry, 100. And then when I want to put in the tube, put it all the way in, press to the first point of resistance, and then press down to the second point to kind of eject the correct volume. And there you have it. Again, pressing down on this white button to release the tip. Very similar process for all of the pipettes. It's just basically how you read the window.